All right, settle in because yesterday and today in the World Cup, it felt like somebody took the script, crumbled it up, and threw it onto a bonfire. We got shocks, we got sob stories, we got VAR theater, and we got a coach saying something so tone deaf that it lit up every timeline. This is the part of the tournament where the veneer peels back and you see the raw stuff: pride, panic, genius, and the kind of officiating that makes you want to throw your remote at the TV. So let's get into it. All right, so let's start with Canada's loss to Morocco 3-0. This is a game that I thought Canada was going to win handedly. They were dominating the game in the first half despite it being a scoreless game. And then Morocco just made all the adjustments and knocked them out. The story of this game is what Canada's coach had to say after they lost. So Jesse Marsh, a man who's been through the ringer, who's coached at high levels, who knows how to manage a room, said something that in the cold light of knockout soccer reads to me as simply tone deaf. He stated, "I'd rather be us than them." Short, punchy, but in context, it landed like a slap. You don't get to be that flippant when your country just got knocked out on home soil. The optics are brutal. Players who poured everything into the tournament, fans who believed, and a coach who offers a line that sounds like he's comparing suffering like it's a badge of honor. Now I'm not here to crucify this guy. Coaches do say ridiculous things under pressure at times. They say things that are meant to rally, to deflect, and to protect. So I understand all that. But there's a difference between protecting your group and dismissing the moment. The fallout is predictable. Social media exploded on X. The pundits picked sides. The narrative became less about the match and more about leadership and empathy. That's a story that we're not going to ignore here, not because it's scandalous or for scandal's sake, but because it speaks to how national teams are run, how accountability works, and how a single line can define a campaign in the public eye. But in the midst of this, Morocco made a huge statement. They did what good teams do in the knockout rounds. They controlled the moments that mattered: clinical finishing, disciplined structure, and a sense of calm that comes from their preparation. They didn't need fireworks. They didn't, they needed ruthlessness. And that's the difference between a team that dreams and a team that executes. Canada had chances, they had hope, but in the end, Morocco's quality in the final third and their tactical clarity closed the door. This is a reminder in the knockout rounds: the scoreboard is the only language that matters. You can be poetic, you could be brave, you could be the sentimental favorite, but if you don't put the ball in the net, the story ends. And then we had France in an absolute dogfight. Now, if you were expecting a masterclass, you didn't get one. What you got was a dogfight. Possession, probing, frustration, and then a VAR awarded penalty that Mbappe buried. And that's the modern knockout template. Possession doesn't win you the tie by itself. You need to convert in the decisive moments, and France did that. So they survived the attrition. They ground out a result. And here's the thing about these dogfights, they expose character. They expose whether a team can handle the ugly parts of the game. And France, with all their talent, showed they could be ugly when they have to. That's, not a knock on Paraguay. That's a compliment. It's easy to be beautiful when everything's going right. It's harder to be effective when the game gets mean. And in knockouts, being effective is the only currency that matters. So, VAR, let's talk about the officiating, because you can't talk about these matches without talking about VAR. England and Mexico tonight, which ended 3-2, England moves on, was a perfect storm. Drama, passion, a sequence of decisions that will be dissected for weeks. Red card, penalties, overturned calls. It's the kind of match that makes fans question whether VAR is a cure or a new kind of disease. Here's my take. VAR was supposed to remove controversy. Instead, it's moved controversy from the field to the review booth. The argument used to be, all right, whatever the ref sees in real time, that should be the call. Now we argue about what the VAR saw in slow motion and whether the interpretation is consistent. That inconsistency is the problem. If the standard is clear and obvious, then apply it consistently. If the standard is marginal, then own that and stop pretending we're eliminating subjectivity. England held on in a 3-2 thriller, but the headlines about with this game are going to be about the calls. As good as the game was, Mexican will feel robbed, England will feel relieved. The neutral will feel exhausted, and the game, the game keeps being the collateral damage in a debate that's as much about governance as it is about technology. And let's touch on the game early today, Norway and Brazil. Erling Haaland is one of the world's best strikers. He's made a lot of noise. He had 2 goals today and a 2-1 win against Brazil. If you need a reminder of what a world-class striker does, Haaland is your reminder. I mean, he imposes himself. He doesn't just score. He makes the game revolve around him. And in a tie game, in a big clutch moment in the knockout round, that's lethal. Norway is a team that we need to start looking out for. There's a narrative shift here too. We talk about generational players and how they define eras. Haaland is carving his name into that conversation. He's a match-winning player. And against Brazil, he was clinical, he was ruthless, he was decisive with every single play. That's what elite players do. They take the moments and they make them irreversible. Now, on the other hand, you have Brazil. Very emotional. Neymar Jr., a player who has carried the weight of that nation for years. This will be his last time in the World Cup. He announced right after the match that he is retiring from international football. So, if Neymar's international chapter is closing, the image of Haaland rising is a neat, almost cinematic passing of the torch here. One era's heartbreak, another era's ascendancy. I don't want to be cold at all about Neymar. This is a guy who has given everything to his country, who has been through injuries, controversies, and, the crushing weight of expectation that comes with playing for Brazil. It's a messy and an emotional deal. And it's, his tears are not just about the loss, they're about his career and the end of a chapter in his life. For the game, we can analyze tactics and formations until we're blue in the face, but sometimes the most important thing is to acknowledge the human cost. That's what makes the World Cup more than a tournament. It's a collection of lives intersecting on a global stage, and to me, that's what makes it really special. So, let's get back to England and Mexico for a second, because Mexico had not lost a match in Azteca in Mexico City. It's a cathedral for soccer. The noise and the pressure makes it a very difficult place to play. The elevation makes it very difficult for visitors to play. Mexico played with heart, with the crowd behind them, and they pushed England to the edge, but England's win was gritty, down to 10 men. They had to stave off a bombardment from Mexico in the last around 25 minutes of the match. If you're the coach, you're thinking about how to prepare your team for an environment. If you're a player, you're thinking about how to keep your head when the decisions go against you. And a really tough one for Mexico. I'm sure their fans are going to be disappointed. And Harry Kane with another goal, and he's just one of these players that's just lighting up this tournament. Last but not least, huge news today regarding the match against the United States men's national team and Belgium. Balogun's red card has been suspended. Now, it means that he will be available and he will play. And that's seismic. His presence changes the entire dynamic of the game. Suddenly you have a focal point in the box, somebody who could finish chances and occupy defenders. And for Belgium, that's a tactical nightmare. And for the US, it's a boost of confidence. This is the kind of news that can alter preparation on both sides. Pochettino now has options he might not have expected. The US can be more direct and more aggressive in the final third, and that forces Belgium to adjust. And it's a chess match, and the best piece for the United States is back on the board. So expect runs in behind, expect a lot of crosses, expect the US to try to pin Belgium back. Belgium will need to be compact, disciplined, and clinical on the counterattack. This is a match that will be decided by moments, a set piece, a turnover, a mistake, a single finish, and that's basically what we've seen, right, throughout this whole tournament. Huge controversy in this red card being suspended. It's been reported and corroborated by multiple sources that President Trump did call FIFA and asked the president of FIFA to review the red card. Now, only God knows what was really said during that conversation, but FIFA overturned the call. It's not something that we really have seen happen before in the World Cup, and it's it's definitely ruffling some feathers to the point where we have the Belgium national team basically saying that they're ready to lawyer up against FIFA based on the decision. So it does have potential to get ugly in that way, but at the same time, you know, my argument towards Belgium is, what are you afraid of? You know, now you get to play us at full strength. Now, if you beat us or if you lose to us, or, you know, if you beat us, there aren't any excuses that we weren't at full strength, which you would have heard. And now if you win, you get to relish in the fact that something happened that usually doesn't happen, and a player got to play in the game who normally wouldn't get to play in the game, and you still won. So for me, it's a little too soon for... I understand they want to get ahead of it and express their, you know, their angst against the decision, and they have every right to, I suppose, but let's get real. You know, FIFA made the correct decision anyway. Everybody and their sister, okay, who has been watching soccer for a minute and has an idea of what a true red card is, knew that that shouldn't have been a red card. You had people all around the soccer universe saying that that shouldn't have been a red card. So, with all that being said, let's just play and let's just see who's better and what do you have to be afraid of. So, you know, we've got the quarterfinalists ready: Morocco, France, Norway, England. We've got 4 ties still to settle. We've got narratives colliding, the old guard and the new, the human, the technological, the poetic, and the pragmatic. And we've got a tournament that refuses to be predictable. If you want one takeaway from this World Cup so far, the World Cup is a mirror. It shows us the best of soccer, the brilliance, the drama, the passion, and it shows us the parts that need to be fixed. You know, inconsistency, poor communication, the occasional lack of empathy from those in charge. You know, those are all tensions that make the tournament irresistible. Expect more shocks, expect more tears, expect more controversy, and above all, expect the game to keep giving us stories that are messy, beautiful, and impossible to look away from. We will record tomorrow and update you on what's going on with the United States men's national team and whether they will be moving on or not. Peace out.